Welcome everybody to the Ambition Project Show. I'm your host, Deirdre Sanborn. On this show, I interview ambitious leaders who share their stories about what's worked for them so that you can learn the strategies to achieve greater levels of success at work, at home, in your communities, and with your families. If you like what you hear on this show, subscribe to it on iTunes or go to my website at www.theambitionprojectshow.com. Today, I'm at the home of Vince Poscente. He's an Olympian, a New York Times bestselling author, and a Hall of Fame speaker. So Vince,
hey,
thanks for joining me today, and
You're
thanks
welcome.
for having me in your home.
You're welcome. I just had to walk upstairs. This is great.
So for over 2 decades, you've researched, wrote, and written a couple of really great books, The Ant and the Elephant and The Age of Speed, and you talk about life mastery.
Right.
You've done some pretty incredible things, like within 4 years, going from simply just being a recreational skier to being an Olympic contestant.
Yeah.
How does that happen? How do you even do that? Maybe you tell me some more about it.
Well, I love the name of your show, by the way, The Ambition Project.
Thank you.
And the fact that we all have ambitions, yet is our ambition something where there's a little voice that says that's not realistic, right? Or that can't happen. And so to have that little voice stand in our way is part of that story. Because I had raced actually in luge for a while, but quit. And when the Olympics rolled around in Calgary in '88, there was buddies that I'd raced against, and they're marching in the Olympic Games, and I wasn't. And I realized that at 26 years old, if you don't commit, if you don't step in and engage, it's just not going to happen. And so I guess I grew up a little bit at that age and realized if you don't step in and go towards what's uncertain, then you'll never know. So part of that secret sauce for ambition, I think, is not so much what you want to create or what you want to build or be a part of. It's also what you never want to experience again. So often when we go towards something, it's because we've reached a point of pain or discomfort or regret, the sting of regret, which was that case at the opening ceremonies of the Olympic Games. I had a ticket and realized that wasn't good enough. And so that was the beginning of this idea to go towards the Olympic Games in speed skiing, which would be in the next Olympic Games in Albertville, France in '92. So
you were a contestant for luging, is that a word?
Luging. I was a luger.
Did you know the guys from Cool Runnings at that time?
I did, actually. We became friends.
You did?
Yeah, the driver. And I didn't know the rest of the guys. But,
were they the inspiration for you getting
No.
skiing?
Well, those Olympic Games, we had Eddie the Eagle, which is also...
the movie?
Yeah, it just came out when we're recording. But and then Cool Runnings as well. But
so
they
you
were
actually knew Eddie the Eagle?
No, I met him.
Okay.
I met him in '87 and then again in '88, and he couldn't believe the fame and attention he was getting. He just couldn't believe it. I mean, he was just mobbed by everybody. Everybody wanted to talk to him and meet him, and yeah.
That's incredible.
The guys that were dead last in both their disciplines were the most famous people in those Olympic Games.
So tell us about you and how you've inspired so many people. I mean, did you set a record for speed skiing?
I set 5 national records. The last one was 135 miles an hour on skis.
I can't even imagine driving that fast, much less going that fast on skis.
Yeah, it's fast in a car, but in a tight rubber suit, it's a different story, yeah.
So tell me more about how you got from, okay, I'm not even a competitor in one Olympics to setting world records in the next one.
Yeah, the idea here was when I watched my buddies march in the opening ceremonies of the Olympic Games, and they were competing for Canada in the sport of luge, I realized that I could use something what I now call the Yahoo theory. And it's if that Yahoo can do it, so can I.
Okay.
There's so many examples of other people that can go before you. And so really what stands in the way are our fears. what am I afraid of? Afraid of failing, afraid this might be a waste of time, afraid of losing money, afraid of ridicule, and maybe a combination of all those things. But like I said, the sting of regret was so intense that is what motivated this ambition to move forward with this Olympic dream. And so I looked across the landscape of sports in the Olympic sports, winter sports, and hockey was out. I was too small. Figure skating was out because I don't look good in leotards. What else?
What do you do in a rubber suit?
Yeah. Well, it's cold, so maybe not. We won't go there. It's 10 below and it's cold, so give me a break. And so the idea with speed skiing, it would be a demonstration sport in the Olympics in Albertville. There are gold, silver, bronze medals in those sports, demonstration sports. And then I just thought that is the window of opportunity. And so I quit my job and just started to learn how to ski race. I had to learn how to wax skis. And there's just a bunch of stories in there where you got to be bold. You have to be courageous. And the courage is more in the action rather than being courageous. You just have to step forward into uncertainty. Mm-hmm. And the second race of my life was the North American Championships in Blackcomb, Whistler Blackcomb.
Wow.
And what was happening in the sport is they were combining the professional athletes, the professional speed skiers, and allowing them to become amateurs. So the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, allowed these former pros to become amateurs. And so they combined the amateur speed skiers with the pros, and I just walked in not telling either. I just went. And what you got from going to that international race was called a FIS card, the Fédération Internationale du Ski. So if you have a FIS card, you can go race internationally. So I skipped over a bunch of steps and had access to world races. And so then, and I didn't win at these, of course, but I got my FIS card at the North American Championships, and then was able to race internationally from then on. And then that kind of courageous step, of course I was terrified. I was terrified. I was shaking before the race run, thinking I'm going to die. But looking back, you have to do those things. You have to do those things that don't have certainty to them. Minimize the risk, of course, but.
So it's a combination of luck that you were able to have this event to do it, but you overcoming this tremendous amount of fear.
Right.
How did you overcome fear in that moment?
Oh man, I guess it's how do you overcome fear? I still get afraid of things. I've got teenagers. I give them the keys and I just see my BMW go down the street going, oh my God, please, so I have fear, but I guess you just step forward and just keep stepping forward. It's funny, there's a guy named Laurie Skreslip. He's a mountain climber, climbed Everest. And he said, the further away you get from fear, the larger it gets. The closer you go towards fear, the smaller it gets. So.
And then once you cross the threshold of fear, is there anything there?
Well, I think you know the answer. I mean, once you get into something, maybe 80, 90, 99% of the fears were just, an illusion. Your imagination of what could go wrong, and you realize it's not that bad,
But when you're going 130 plus miles per hour,
right.
that fear must be palpable.
Well, it would be, but you don't start there. This very first race I went to before the North American Championships, I went 62 miles an hour. And I thought my eyelids were going to peel off. I mean, I was going so fast, but then you go 60 miles an hour a few times, and then you think, well, I could go 70. And then you go 70 miles an hour and you think it's fast. And then think of the first time you drove a car, for example, right? I'm going to take you back. And when you're driving 30 miles an hour down the road, the first time, I just went through this with my 15-year-old. She was getting up, going down the road, and she was going 15, 20. You can go faster, and everything's going by her. The first time I took her on the highway and then brought her back to 30 miles an hour, 30 miles an hour is slow. Right? You can take things in. So the brain can process it and then start to become comfortable with any setting, any scenario.
So would you say overcoming fear partially it's about just taking that first step, and then it's a journey of acclimation.
Yeah. I would also say that what helps me personally is not itemizing, but identifying all the things, all the risks that are inherent in doing this activity. Let's say it's a new business, for example. I just helped start a software company, right? So we minimize the risk as many places as we can, and then we step forward and then have less fear as a result of minimizing risk. You can't eliminate risk, but people would say, "Oh, you're a daredevil," and I said, "Well, I don't know, because daredevils just leap and then think."
Right.
There's a lot of thought that goes into doing something wisely.
So you're improving your chances of success by mitigating the risk that you can in advance of taking that first step.
Right.
That's what I hear you saying.
Yeah.
So really the wise thing to do is take that first step, but first think about what obstacles you may be coming across and how you can address those before you get to that point.
Right. Yeah, that impetuousness is sometimes celebrated, the spontaneity. But the true professionals out there, I would say comedians are a good example. Well, you can watch comedians and just go, "That guy's a genius," He's Jerry Seinfeld, for example. I mean, he is still going, and he's going to comedy clubs, and he's just saying, "Hey, do you mind if I do a set up here?" He's trying out new stuff. He's 61 years old. He's practically a billionaire from comedy, and he's still going to comedy clubs and trying out new material.
He's actually doing this YouTube thing, Cars and Coffee, or Comedian and Coffee and Cars, and he's just driving around with people in cars having conversations, and he's really taking that risk by trying a new format, a new medium, and granted, I mean, how much risk when you already have, billions of dollars or whatever. I mean,
that's a great story, because if you poke around in there, you find out that he was turned down a bunch. And the website called Crackle. Now, who had heard of Crackle before Jerry Seinfeld, But Crackle said, "Yeah, we can run with this." Now he's got 300 plus million views. Okay?
So Crackle's going, winning.
Yeah. Heck yeah, they are.
He took a risk, a measured risk.
And it was the funniest thing about Seinfeld, because he says, "How famous do you have to be? How much evidence do you need that I mean, even he got turned down." Right?
Yeah.
So if you're an entrepreneur out there and you're struggling with something and you feel that you're getting turned down, Jerry Seinfeld got turned down.
That's actually hugely heartening, right?
Yeah, right.
Everybody gets turned down, even though you're proven success.
Yeah, well, yeah. So back to that whole fear thing. Of course, there's going to be fear. Minimize the risk. Again, are you passionate about it? So, and so that's what I still do to this day. I mean, I look at it. Doing that, does that give me energy? Is there some risk to it? Sure. Do I have fear? Okay. Can I minimize that risk? Of course. And then step in. And then you can step in and go, "God, this is boring. I want to do something else," yeah, this is great.
So I hear a really important component of this is the energy piece. Is it exciting to you?
Yeah.
Because why step in if it's not?
Yeah. Well, I'm 54 now, and I've got a real, I'm just maturing so slowly. In fact, I'm really 12. And this whole thing around energy is something I'm starting to really pay attention to, because if you have something that gives you energy, why not pay attention to it? It doesn't have to be realistic, right? It just has to light you up. And then, okay, well, if it lights you up, just follow that passion, follow that energy.
Right. It's like the Joseph Campbell, follow your bliss.
Yeah, follow your bliss. And that bliss is another state of just pure awareness. I mean, we could go down that whole...
That rabbit hole all day long.
Yeah, but, I'd say with this Olympic story, it wasn't realistic, but there was something about the Olympic Games that I liked. I don't know why. There might be an answer out there, but I followed it, And so when I started, I realized very quickly that in order to make the national Olympic team, for Canada, or the U.S. for that matter, you have to be ranked top 16 in the world or top half, right? So our Olympic qualifying standards were so high that the story of Eddie the Eagle, the Jamaican bobsled team, very different, because he wouldn't have been to the Olympic Games had the British Olympic Committee at that time had Olympic qualifying standards for ski jumping.
Okay.
Never crossed their mind, right? I think. Or the Jamaicans, you know, they don't have Olympic qualifying standards. We did.
Okay.
And what that meant was if I wanted to make the Olympic team, I had to be better than 15, or I had to be within that top 16 barrier in the world.
So you're saying the obstacles you had to overcome were actually greater than the story of Eddie the Eagle or the Jamaican bobsled team?
At the time, that was what it played out. Just before the Olympic Games, then they said, we don't have Olympic qualifying standards for speed skiing, so they let the entire the 4 guys go, right? And I was maybe the only guy ranked top 16. But leading up to these Olympic Games, I want to say this. To make that team, I never thought of my competition as local or national, regional, national, or international. I always thought of my competition as the top 15 guys in the world. Mm-hmm. And when you change your mindset about what level of excellence is going to be necessary from you, mm-hmm. Let me say that again. When you change your mindset about the level of excellence that's going to be necessary from you, then you compete in a different way altogether.
So if you set the bar super high, that's the differentiator. That's the mindset.
You set the bar, yeah, I get what you're saying, but it can be so disheartening when you set the bar so high.
Right, that's what
I want to be a billionaire, right? Okay, well then, and I look at a bank account and say, well, that's not going to happen, right? So you give up because you're disheartened.
Right.
So I always changed how I competed and wanted to compete against whatever they were doing. You see? So what if let's say you made a decision, I want to have $10 million in the bank account, right? Well, what would another person with $10 million do on a daily basis? And I have have that level of excellence. You see what I mean?
I do.
So you're not, and the rest of the guys I was racing against, we'd be at a local race, and I would never think that I was competing against those guys in that local race, which is
sense.
a mindset, right? I always thought, well, what if the top 15 guys were in this race? How fast would they go? What would they do as they prep and all those things? So that was a big differentiator in stepping into a very, very competitive landscape.
So would you say you overcame obstacles because you had this mindset of you're competing at this pretty high level?
Oh,
and
yeah.
And how did you get to that understanding? Was there somebody who showed you along the way that this is what you need to be thinking, or did you just discover through trial and error that that was the case?
Well, it was, okay, let me answer it this way. So the level of excellence that you would engage in, let's say this Olympic journey, I started to realize that I could split it into 4 categories. And I'm saying these for everybody to really replicate, right? You got financial, you got physical, you got technical, and you got mental. So I had 4 categories that I always wanted to do very, very well at. The financial was, if you want to get somewhere, chances are you're going to need money. So what financial things will you do to generate revenue? Would it be sponsorship? Would it be, I was selling real estate at the time. I teamed up with another guy because I couldn't be home much. And so I was doing certain things and in a competitive landscape, generating some revenue. The second was physical. So the physical things were, well, what are the top 15 guys doing in the world for physical training, right? And to reach that level of excellence. The technical was making myself a student of aerodynamic principles. And I'd be going to the library. I read a book called The Love of Laminar Flow, Aerodynamics in You, right? How many athletes are reading the book, The Love of Laminar Flow? They're not, right? They're just not. But in there was the phone number for the wind tunnel at the Boeing factory in Seattle.
Wow.
Right? So I call up Boeing and I say, can I get in your wind tunnel? He goes, you can't get in this wind tunnel unless you pay in advance. And so I couldn't get in the wind tunnel. But once you go down this path, you start to go, well, wait a minute. Why don't I get on top of my friend's car? So he had a BMW X M5.
No.
Yeah. It was a BMW M5. He changed it at the last minute because he didn't want me to scratch the top of his car. So we ended up being on top of a Subaru a station wagon at one point, and then we got on his BMW, I think.
Because one's faster than the other?
Oh, it went like stink. So, and on top of my friend's car, on the roof rack, bombing down the road. And I think that's a scene out of Eddie the Eagle as well. He gets on top of his friend's car. Yeah, I haven't seen the movie, but so I mean, if you explore under the category of financial, physical, technical, you start to learn things. And what would the top 15 guys in the world not be doing or not willing to do those kinds of things? So I was always in this search mode for that level of excellence, awareness within financial, physical, technical. And then the fourth level is mental. And this is the one that I think most everybody ignores, actually, because we're in a society based on instant gratification. So if we don't get instant gratification, we get bored, we move on, this isn't working. Yet this ends up being a competitive advantage if you spend some time and have delayed gratification on getting the mind right. And so the mental training piece was all over the map when it came to how I competed as an athlete. And going to the library, you get a $2.50 library card. And the rule is you have to go to the library and bring the book back within 3 weeks. Well, I would bring the book back read within 3 weeks and then get out another book. So within 30 weeks, that's 10 books, No, 30. Anyways,
that's
you know
what I mean.
A lot of
reading.
Yeah, 10 books in 30 weeks. Yeah, so you've got a real sense on how you can actually be an expert in that category. So mental training, I was pulling ideas. One of them was the gold dot strategy. And the gold dot, I brought, my wallet here, for example. And you put on your wallet a gold dot. And every time you open your wallet to pay for something, you see that gold dot. And you go, oh. And what I say to myself here is I'm the fastest speed skier in Canada, top 10 in the world. So if you're fastest in Canada, top 10 in the world, what does that mean? Well, you've qualified for the Olympic team, so therefore you're marching in the opening ceremonies of the Olympic Games. And so what's critical with the gold dot concept is that you see yourself marching in the opening ceremonies, but you also hear it. You hear the national anthem. You smell it. What would the smells be associated with being outdoors at the Olympic Stadium? What would it sound like when they say, now from Canada, when you hear that Olympic music? What would the ground underneath your feet feel like when people are shaking your hand, you're high-fiving people in the stands, the smells, the sights, the sounds. I know there's 5 senses, so right? And then roll in the emotion attached to that. What would that feel like? The satisfaction, the joy, the gratitude, And every time you see a gold dot, boom, you've imprinted the subconscious mind. And that's a pretty powerful thing.
That's really powerful. So you've got gold dots all over the place, but
right.
Let me ask you this. How do you not... Sometimes people put like a string around their wrist and then they forget that the string is what the string means.
Right.
Like, how do you have gold dots and remember to get that juiciness?
That is a great question. Because if the gold dot doesn't have what's called an emotional buzz, it's not a very good gold dot. Mm-hmm. So, for example, if my gold dot would be to be debt-free, right? Well, what does that mean? Is there emotion attached to that? Versus what if my gold dot was, I have a cottage that's free and clear by the lake, right? Okay, I'm picturing a family reunion there. I have no mortgage on this place. The family's there. We've got boats. The kids are there. We're having fun. We've got other relatives in town. We're cooking the barbecue. You could smell the smoke of the barbecue and all that. Then you got something that lights you up. Then you've got something you go, wait a minute, I could remember that.
So there's a big subconscious component to this, because there's some people who think, so I'm from, the financial community, and, I put a lot of focus on the importance of good financial management, right?
Right,
but
that's your space.
That's my thing, but for some people, they think about financial management, and you could just see their eyes cloud over. The idea of being debt-free is like, God, it's so boring.
Right.
So you're connecting a positive emotion to...
Yeah, more than emotion. Emotion is a big piece of that, but it's also the 5 senses, which really, in a word, is experience. So if you have emotion attached with an experience, I'm going to make up a word, experientialize it. right? Experience this when you can see it, smell it, taste it, touch it, and then if it has emotion attached to it, it becomes so real, it's magnetic rather than I have to do this or I have to remember what that string around my wrist means, you know. There's an emotion attached to it.
So I think this is a great segue to talk about the book you wrote,
Right.
The Ant and the Elephant.
Right, right.
And the story, if I could just summarize briefly and correct me if I go off track, is this ant is living on the back of an elephant and has no clue it's living on the back of the elephant, and it wants to head in a certain direction. It's gotten wind of this thing called the oasis, and it wants to head west toward the oasis. And he starts losing hope for some reason. He just doesn't seem to be getting any closer. And then one day, this wise old owl flies out of nowhere from the vast horizon to meet the ant and says, hey, guess what? You're on the back of the elephant, and the elephant is heading in the opposite direction of the direction you want to go in. And the ant's like, oh my gosh, this is terrible. What do I do about it? And so the story you tell is a fable,
Right.
which hooks into the emotional and the five senses piece, but drills down to 5 principles that are important to achieving your goals. And so the elephant represents the unconscious or subconscious,
Right.
and then the ant represents the conscious,
Right.
wanting to march very definitively in a direction, and maybe its actions being thwarted as a result.
Right.
Maybe you could tell us more about that.
Yeah, let me give you a backstory on that book, because this is how this comes about when you're writing a book. It's always sparked by an idea, and the idea that'll keep you up at night. And it was a speech that I heard by a guy named Dr. Lee Poulos. And he found within research that in a second of time, the conscious mind processes with 2,000 neurons. So in 1 second of time, your conscious mind is processing what I have to say, right? And you might be thinking, well, I'm enjoying this interview. You might be thinking, he's got spinach in his teeth. You might be thinking, I look like the old guy from Up. Whatever
Hey,
you're
you
thinking.
do!
Yeah, great. Yeah. Great. I shouldn't have said that. Now, put a handful of balloons in my hand and I got it. Yeah. So you do. And so this whole conscious mind is processing with it 2,000 neurons. That's 1 second of time. In the same second, your subconscious mind is processing with 4 billion neurons. So think about the ratio for a second, just for a second. 2,000 neurons versus 4 billion neurons subconsciously, below conscious thought. Like, who's in control? The subconscious. The ratio between the conscious and subconscious mind is the exact same ratio between an ant and an elephant. And so consciously, we make decisions all day long. You know, I want to go west. And you start marching west because you got willpower, right? Yeah, I'm going to go west. But what if the elephant is headed east, right? Then we end up east thinking we're going west, and we go, how did I end up here again? And so we do that with finance, we do that with relationships, we do that with our own, health. We do this in all these directions, and we can end up in a place, how did I end up here again? Versus, what if you had 2,000 neurons and 4 billion neurons headed in the same direction? Think about it for a second.
Powerful.
Well, think about it. I mean, how much easier would life be? Right? How could we reduce overwhelm to the degree where it's not even there? It's just the flow. It's just effortless. You're just there. I mean,
That's so interesting, because I notice that oftentimes in life I've ended up in situations where, I was raised in the, work hard and, put your mind to something, you get it done. And sometimes you work really hard and it doesn't seem to be working in your direction. So that would be an indication perhaps that your unconscious isn't aligned with your conscious mind.
Right. So there's 5, as you mentioned, principles. They're really action steps. And the first one is to clarify what it is you want to have, that emotional buzz. What is just the thought of it send a tingle up and down your spine? Because that is a litmus test. Remember high school when we had a litmus strip, right? And it was a litmus test for a good idea. If that litmus test is if a thought creates a physical reaction, it means that the subconscious mind, 4 billion neurons, is saying, would you just pay attention to this one? It doesn't have to be realistic. Going to the Olympic Games in 4 years from today is not realistic.
Right.
But it felt right. Now that right there can get us past that fear we brought up earlier. You know, if you're afraid of something, okay, but does it have an emotional buzz? And if it does, then you can rationalize it and go, well, there's 4 billion neurons every second saying this is a good idea, so why don't I just follow that? You know, why don't I let go and just kind of pursue what may be unrealistic, but I'm curious, and it's got my attention. Because if a thought creates a physical reaction, it means A, the mind is very powerful, and then B, the mind and body are connected. So why not pay attention to that, right? So that's the clarity piece. The second C you'll see in the book, The Ant and the Elephant, is commitment. And commitment's so often thought of as a moment. You know, you think back to when you decided you were in, or every Saturday couples walk down the aisle. There's that commitment, but commitment's a process, right? And again, you know, with a marriage, it's 2 people have to be committed, which complicates it completely. But commitment is a process. It's not a moment. It's a series of moments, you know.
You know what really struck me in your book, and I have never heard of this before, you have to be committed to being committed.
Yeah.
I was like, wow, if I had known that before, and so many things, like being committed to being committed, it takes it to a totally different level.
Right. Yeah, you're constantly checking in with yourself. And so how do you stay committed? Yeah. And that's the third C, which is consistency. And so we kind of covered this already. You know, what are the financial, physical, technical, and mental things you can do on a daily basis? And this under consistency, one of those things is the gold dot that I talked about. So the ant learns that if you have a trigger for the emotional buzz is a litmus test for the alignment of the ant and the elephant. So if you see a gold dot and you get that emotional buzz, you go, that's a good idea. Then you stay the course. Then you've got that alignment of 4 billion neurons going in the same direction as 2,000 neurons. And it's easier. I mean, there's so much celebration in the United States and, you know, North America and maybe the Western world about, you know, just you got to drive and you got to be in pain. You got to suffer your way through and you got to, No, you don't. No, you don't. You don't have to suffer through this. You can actually do this and have about as much fun as you possibly can.
So that's the positive reinforcement piece. I mean, some people may be driven by fear of pain, but it's far more powerful to be driven by the desire to have a positive experience or desire to have fun or a more joyful, fulfilled life.
Right. Yeah. You know, funny, I met and spent some time with Bruce Jenner years ago. And it was interesting in the conversation because I was trying to wrap my mind around fear. And he says, oh, no, I always tried to make fear my friend when I was competing. And so that all of a sudden framed fear in a different way, which was to say, yeah, you may be afraid of something happening, but how can you use it to your own advantage? Well, I don't want to be afraid, so therefore I want to have fun, you know? Make it your friend rather than something.
But how do you make fear your friend? It seems so elusive.
Well, I'll give you an example. So I was training, you know, and I would start to think about riding my mountain bike up a mountain, right? I lived in Calgary. And so I think the mountain top was maybe a half an hour away. And if you've ever gone uphill in a bike, you just want to stop the whole time.
You just want to walk. Why ride?
and then I would go, wait a minute. If I don't get to the top of the mountain by, let's say, 1 o'clock, I will not get to the Olympic Games. And all of a sudden I used fear to motivate me to get to the top of the mountain in that training period. Now, would I not get to the Olympic Games? No, I knew that. But it was a game I was playing with myself to kind of motivate myself to go forward, you know. So it was, make fear your friend. Like getting up at 5 a.m. to work out. Well, if I don't get up, this will create it, and it'll happen again and again and again, and then I won't get reach those fitness goals that I set for myself. So we all have fears. Why not use it to your advantage rather than debilitate you?
Interesting.
Yeah.
And so you've hit on
clarity,
steps,
commitment, and then consistency. Confidence has everything to do with how well you perform.
So consistency, just to back up for a second and make sure I've captured this, consistency includes making fear your friend.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Yeah. Consistency is the execution piece where you are consistent so that when it's the time for you to perform. And performance is, in this interview, for example, how well can I do in this interview? Or if I'm giving a speech, or if I'm going to if you're going to do a sale or a negotiation, how well you do, that's both performance and preparation, right?
Okay.
Confidence is closer to the performance, where are you going to do well on race day, right? Mm-hmm. Confidence has everything to do with performing at the highest level. And we always attach confidence to experience. If I have experience, then I have the confidence. Well, that's the biggest thing today, isn't it? I mean, how do you have experience with everything that seems so new, right? And so how can you have confidence without that experience?
That is so interesting. So is it backward looking or is it forward looking? Can you create your own scenario by leaping forward?
You just did it. So those flashcards of having scenarios that would create a huge amount of stress. Could you have a flashcard that would say something that would be a scenario that would be so fearful? I brought it up earlier. I'll just reiterate it. It's flat light. The guy ahead of you is crashed. There's blood on the track. He gets taken away by the emergency helicopter, and they call your name, you're next, right? That would be a very stressful scenario. But that flashcard is just a pretend scenario. What if you experienced it? What if you heard it, smelled it, tasted it, feel the snow under your feet? You see the blood on the course. I mean, all these things. You hear the helicopter take the guy away, and then you hear your name, you're next. And then you handle this track perfectly, where you go down the mountain and you set a new national record, and then people are cheering and the media running, even hugging you. I mean, what would that feel like, right? So you've just experienced something. So in answer to your question, could you actually have an experience without it happening yet?
This is a really big thing, and I don't know why this is flashing through my mind right now, but you think about, I'm thinking about Sheryl Sandberg's Lean In, and she talks about how a lot of women don't put their name in the hat first because they don't feel like they have the experience first before they do
interesting.
it, right?
Yeah.
And that a lot of men do.
Yeah.
Because they have more confidence.
Right.
So women's referential point seems to be backward looking. Now I'm making a broad generalization here, but maybe it's also that there's also a mindset or a way of thinking around confidence that's like, I am going to imagine a scenario that I am kicking butt out there, right? And this is me projecting to the future. This is my flashcard around like me experiencing that success, hearing it, touching it, tasting it, feeling it. So the confidence piece is even a gold dot moment.
Right. Yeah. If you have time to prepare prior to a sale negotiation, then prepare in a way that builds your own confidence. Because it's just simple fact that if fear is high and confidence is low, your performance will go down. Because if fear is high and confidence is low, how could the performance be strong, even if you got tons of experience? So if performance is down, what is the results? What are the results? I mean, they're compromised. And so what we typically do is we say, wait, those results, we're not happy with those results, so we need to change our performance. We need better performance, and so we'll do this with our kids. You know what you need to do? Next time you have to do this, this, and this. Well, what if you went back to the fear and confidence piece? Whether you're a parent or a supervisor or for yourself, looking in the mirror. What if you flipped that gap and you had high confidence and low fear? What would think, even if you had no skill in an area, if you had high confidence and low fear, what would your performance be?
So you're saying it's not even about the skill necessarily, but more about the self-image piece of are you confident enough in yourself, and therefore you can grow into the skill.
Yeah. So remember that the ratio between the conscious and subconscious mind is the exact same ratio between an ant and an elephant. And if 2,000 neurons can't comprehend how to be confident in a situation you don't have experience in. But that's 2,000 neurons. What if 4 billion neurons every second were confidence? Do you think it could figure it out?
I think so.
Yeah. You could probably figure, if you had that kind of supreme confidence, you could probably figure out how to do a double flip off the diving board, right? Because you would just go, well, but how that, the machinations of how to make that happen, I'm not getting into that right now. What I'm saying is when confidence is high and fear is low, 4 billion neurons will figure it out.
Interesting.
But are you going in wisely? Are you going in with the preparation necessary?
Have you thought about mitigating the risk that will come
yeah.
up before you head in?
Right.
This
So, and that leads you to the fifth C, which is control. And these are lined up very specifically in this order. One, get there early. Like you can't control an environment, but you can control what you bring to an environment. So you get there early. What happens to stress when you get there early, right? It's managed. So what's your confidence level when stress is low or managed? It's higher, right? Okay, here we go. So the second piece is breathe. Oxygenate the system. The fear response, the part of your brain called the amygdala, is kicked into gear when you reduce oxygen flow to it. The way you do that is by shallow breathing. Go, like if you're in a scary situation, you forget to breathe, right?
Right.
That kicks the amygdala in, and it's fight or flight or freeze. By the way, there's 3. And so none of those all 3 of those is a stress response. So what happens to confidence when stress is really mismanaged?
Right.
But if you oxygenate the system, what happens to confidence? See?
Brings it up, yep.
3, you visualize the outcome. If you know the outcome in a situation, what's your confidence level? So visualize the outcome. So you got there early, you breathe deep, you visualize the outcomes, right, within what's about to happen is sale, negotiation, speech, whatever. 4, you bring in energy. I call it the vortex technique, where you just bring in energy. And I'd always ask for the highest and the best. I want just the best energy. And then the 5th one is just a fascinating tool, which is so going to go the grain of everybody that's a driven individual. It's all you do is let go and have fun. Just have fun. Just have fun. If you have fun, what's your confidence level, right? So bam, 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 bam. Your confidence is at as high as it's going to get, and then you step in, right? And so you've controlled what you bring to the environment, and that performance, that speech, negotiation, whatever, goes as well as it can be based on your skill set and how lucky you are and just how things align. And you've got 4 billion neurons every second working in your favor. I mean, those are great odds.
So it sounds like there's several components. It's mental. There's the physical piece, which is really quite fundamentally just breathing. There's a visualization piece also with you refer to as the vortex, or bringing things in and really connecting with things through all your senses. And there's the emotional piece too as a result of that. And so is there a spiritual piece in there? Mental, emotional,
I would
physical,
encourage
spiritual?
anybody to do that piece as they see fit. Yeah, because spirituality, let's just distill it down to one word, which is faith, right?
Yeah.
And faith is believing in something you can't see, right? So faith is also very much to do with letting go. And if you let go of something and are in that centered space of who you are and what you're meant to do, and you're celebrating that in your actions and thoughts, right? Then what kind of spiritual setting wouldn't reward that, right?
Well, it's kind of like being in the flow.
Yeah, right.
So you had mentioned you're working on a sequel to The Ant and the Elephant.
Yes.
Maybe
You're
you
breaking this news, yes.
Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, okay, so The Ant and the Elephant is wildly successful. It's 14 languages. I have no idea how many copies have been printed. I know it's over 250,000 copies. And for a self-published book, that's just, really rare. Yeah. It's been quoted by LeBron James in Sports Illustrated. The Dallas Cowboys, prior to their breakout season, not this last one, the one before, I didn't tell anybody because the Cowboys just suck so bad. I didn't tell anybody. And then
They need to reread the book.
the coaching staff took the ant and the elephant, and then they had a great season. I was like, oh, wow, should have told people. So, but, you know, I'm a curious dude, so I thought, why not a sequel? And it occurred to me that we all at times experience earthquakes. Whether you get cancer, or you get fired, or you get divorced, or you get a setback of some sort, an earthquake, right? The metaphor of an earthquake. How you get out of that earthquake is very, very different than how you get from point A to point B. And The Ant and the Elephant basically is a point A to point B book. The ant is where he's at. He's not too happy where he's at, but he wants to get to the oasis. How do I get from where I'm at to that oasis, right? This book is the ant, the elephant, and the earthquake. The ant and the elephant, things are going fine, and then all of a sudden they experience an earthquake. How do you get out of that? How do you get from that devastation to back on track, to back to what ends up being a new oasis altogether? So.
Right, because that's the antithesis of a flow state. Like, it sounds great to be in flow, and you know, it seems like it's easy to have faith until you're challenged. How do you deal with that situation?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of pieces to the book, a lot of moving parts, because to get away from that devastation. I mean, for example, let's say I had a knife in my leg, and somebody's advice would be, well, don't think about the knife. Just think about what you would love to have. Well, are you kidding me? There's a knife in my leg, right? And so, you know, not thinking about the pain, taking your mind off that, actually recuperating from the devastation, and getting reset, because we're all fragile. We all have doubts. We all have moments where we realize ultimately we're in our own way. And so it's ultimately about changing beliefs. You know, I went through something very similar. Part of the reason I'm writing this book is I went through that, you know. I had some setbacks financially. I made a few business decisions that backfired. And man, we were on the cliff's edge. It was a tough situation. And, you know, it's self-doubt. I wasn't sure I had it anymore. Did I lose it somehow? Am I not relevant? Am I just, you know, as I'm just, you know, all this stuff that is part of the human condition.
This is what sets you apart, though, Vince. I mean, this is how you went from being an Olympian to a best-selling author to a really great speaker. Like, the willingness to, like, completely look at something and shift gears. And there aren't many people who like to admit that they were beset by problems and then talk about it and hash it out and then figure it out. I mean, this is, I think, what sets people apart, really, is the willingness to really unmask what's going on and, like, dive right in.
Yeah.
Do you agree?
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah. And you can ignore it. I could have tried to say, no, it's not happening, it's not happening, it's not happening. But, you know, I had to really get raw and figure out what it was. I had an interesting experience. This is pretty recent, actually. So I had a 5-city tour. I was going to coach groups in 5 different cities on the whole concept of the gold dot, the ant and the elephant, the whole thing, right? When I left home, and this is pretty recent, I had $80 in my bank account, right? Now,
wow.
Just think about the house you're sitting in right now. Things were on just like, what? You know, it was just to this point of going, how am I going to figure this out? What do I do? And things played out. You know, I'd get into town and people say, hey, what hotel are you staying at? Well, I haven't picked it out yet. Well, come stay with us. Okay. You know, and so, you know, things just kind of worked out along.
They line up.
Yeah. Well, when I was getting into Vancouver, I went and realized that this guy, Dr. Lee Pulu, so I brought up earlier, lived in Vancouver. And then all of a sudden I remembered, wait a minute, I got his phone number from somebody in Seattle. And I went to my phone, I went, there it is, this is his phone number. So I went, well, I'll just call him. So I called up Dr. Lee Poulos, and I said, hey, I'm writing the book, The Ant and the Elephant and the Earthquake. And he goes, who are you? And I said, well, and I remind him, he says, oh, yeah, well, okay, let's spend some time together. So I'm doing research for a book. How do people get out of this earthquake? How do they recover, And concurrent to all that, I'm going through this at the same exact time. And as he's talking about it, at some point in the interview, I went from me researching the book to go, hypothetically, I know this guy that's going through this tough time. And he said, well, you know what? If you're looking at the results that you have and you're not happy with those results, you got to change your beliefs. Because if you have new beliefs, you have beliefs that take you in the wrong direction, they'll take you in the wrong direction.
But what I hear you saying is that it's a constant journey. So you think you have the answer, and then sometimes an earthquake will change it up. And then you have to look at your underlying beliefs and see, okay, where have things changed for me? Or is there a deeper level of my unconscious that I wasn't aware of until now?
Yeah, and I had to go through that exact journey. And sitting there with Dr. Lee Poulos, I realized I had beliefs that needed changing.
So even though you've accomplished so much in your lifetime,
right,
there's proof that everybody is always working on their stuff.
Yeah, always.
Always.
I don't care who you are, and maybe that mythical unicorn person exists out there, but and then things turn around within a couple, 6, 7 weeks. I had a $43,000 week, and then that produced another thing. And then an equity position in this software company, and I just turned it around. And it's not because I did anything.
Did you have a breakthrough?
I guess a few breakthroughs. I changed my mind around money because when you go through a painful situation, you then attach pain to that situation. And so then you're reluctant to go back to any situation that may be relevant to that.
So it's the fear piece.
The fear piece, yeah, or that you will have pain, yeah, as a result of this. And then part of it was actually, believe it or not, making money meant that it was going to create more pain. And I went, wait a minute, that's not true. It didn't have to be true, So, that's a bit of psychobabble, but it's what I went through. So.
Interesting. So when can we expect to see the sequel?
Well, we're going to shop the book in New York here coming up. And then, I don't know, I would think by the end of the year we should have it done.
Exciting.
Yeah.
And I think we just hit on the tip of the iceberg on some of these principles. And there's deeper levels.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Is there any place that people could go to get more information?
I have a website. It's vinceposcente.com.
Okay.
And if you know how to spell Poscente, you're going to find it.
Poscente.
That's right.
Poscente.
Yeah. So, and I also have a free ebook, and you're going to list the link for that. So.
Yes. So on my website, I'm going to have the link listed. It's www.theambitionprojectshow.com. And the link will be there. And I'm also going to create a blog from this podcast.
Oh, are you?
You could boil it all down in one juicy, or maybe a couple of juicy tidbits, if that's okay with you.
We've covered a lot of ground.
Yeah,
so.
we have.
Yeah.
So I like to ask all my guests about if they have a favorite ambition quote that means something to them personally. Do you have something you could share with us today?
Yes, I do. In thinking about it, you asked me earlier, and I want to summarize our interview with this ambition quote. And it's let me set this up. We typically compete in a way we want to do what the competition's not doing. So if I was a realtor, I want to do what the other realtors aren't doing to get more business. If I'm a car salesman, I'm going to try and sell cars in a way the competition doesn't sell cars. But what will completely change the game and take your ambition to a whole new level is to do what the competition isn't willing to do. Now think about that. If you do what the competition is not willing to do, you got to define who the competition is. And your competition just isn't anybody. Remember the ski racing, it wasn't local, it wasn't national, it wasn't international. It was the top 16 guys in the world. So then when you think about that, what are the top 16 guys in the world not willing to do? And when you think of it that way...
That's fear-inducing, Vince.
It doesn't have to be. Because, for example, the top 16 guys in the world weren't willing to go to a PhD in the politics and sport.
Got
right?
it, yep.
So I picked up the phone and I had a half-an-hour interview with a guy who got his PhD in politics and sport and asked him one simple question. If you were me, and you wanted to get to the Olympic Games in 4 years from now, what would you do? What advice would you give yourself? You know, and he says, oh yeah, and he went down the list of things. One of the things is you got to be number one ranked person in the nation. He said, if you're second place or lower in Canada, you will be subject to somebody else's agenda.
But how is that doing what the competition doesn't want to do? Doesn't everybody want to be number one?
No, what they're not willing to do. So they weren't willing to go to a PhD in sports psychology.
I got it, yeah. They weren't willing to go the extra mile.
They weren't willing to have a $2.50 library card, going to the library and reading a book every 3 weeks, right?
Putting the extra work in.
Yeah, the extra work, but in a very simple way. Like the competition would not be willing to spend less time physical training, for example. I went to the Olympics on 1/3 the amount of physical training time than anybody else I raced against did.
Because it was untested, though.
Well, what's the worst that could happen? I'd never ski raced before.
True
right?
that, yeah.
Yeah, so what I did was I spent more time mental training, which was doing visualization and imagery and float tanks and hypnosis programs and biofeedback and meditation. Oh, and then the aerodynamics in a pink rubber suit. Yeah.
Very interesting. Are there any other resources, books that you would recommend to the listeners that you've...
Well, right now I'm reading the book called Letting Go by David Hawkins. And it's a book he wrote just before he passed away, actually. And it's in a tremendous book just about the whole reason why it's great for you to let go of stuff, you know, because you'll get further by letting go.
God, that's so hard for me, where I'm like, I'm so driven, so American, as you would say, and my drive and my desire to succeed, my raw ambition. But sometimes that gets in the way, is what I hear you saying.
I would read that book. Yeah, I'm really getting a lot out of it. David Hawkins, he wrote a book called Power versus Force. And from the energy standpoint, there's certain energy around words like love and acceptance and gratitude and all that. And there's certain energy around hate and bullying, and you know, we're seeing that in the political forum right now.
Yep.
And it drags people backwards, you know. So we need to be more about love and more about providing solutions by just having fun. I mean, why not? What if we just had an emotional buzz and had fun, right?
Just get out there and have a good time.
Yeah, right. I guess it's that complicated.
So, lastly, I wanted to ask you, I love to ask my guests if they would recommend somebody on the show. Is there anybody that you could recommend to me personally that you'd be willing to make an introduction to that I could have on the show?
Yes, I would introduce Dr. Lee Poulos to you guys. I mean,
great.
He's 85 years old. He has been in this mental training space for years. And if you could get him on the show, that would be pretty amazing. He's been a mentor, and he didn't even know it. Every time I've only called him twice, and every time he's going, "Who are you again?" So.
Well, hopefully you could help me.
Well, he's 85, so you better call him quick.
Okay. Well, I'll get right on that. Well, my mission is to spread big ideas and, you know, spread the love. Right?
Great.
So if you liked what you saw here today and you want to learn more, go to www.theambitionprojectshow.com. That's my website. And you could also find us on iTunes with links to Vince's stuff and all that good stuff. So thank you, Vince. This has been such an enjoyable journey.
Great. I enjoyed it as well.
And keep on being ambitious, whatever that means. I think in your lingo, it's have fun.
Have fun.
Put yourself out there.
Keep having fun. It's that complicated. Anyway, great time. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And thank you.